Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to Albany City Council Work Session, August 5th, 2024 at 4 p.m. And I'll call the meeting to order. Allison, we have a roll call, please.
Councillor Newton Abor.
Present.
Councillor Kupczynski.
Here.
Councillor Montague.
Here.
Councillor Smith.
Here.
Councillor McGee.
Here.
Councillor Novak.
Here.
Mayor Johnson.
Here. Thank you very much. Allison, is there any business from the public? Thank you. Jessica Becker, are you online? Jessica Becker? She's not online? All right, thank you. Jessica Becker, are you in the room? We'll go ahead and move on. House policy options. Ann Catlin, pages 2 through 30 in your packet for discussion.
Where's the PowerPoint? Here we go. Oh, okay, sorry, I just thought it would already be open. Okay. Thank you, Mayor and councilors. I'm Ann Catlin with the Community Development Department. I want to share my screen. Go ahead and, all right, can you get that going? Yeah. Sorry about that. While we're getting our PowerPoint up and running, we wanted to go over the housing policies background report that was in your packet. As you may remember, we did have a housing affordability task force that met in 22, mostly 2022 and 23, and they worked on evaluating a bunch of different tools and strategies to address our housing needs, which were outlined in our housing needs analysis. And they ended up recommending that you adopt the housing implementation plan, which was adopted last year on June 30th. So what we are here today is to look at some of those tools, and they're mostly the policy tools that really need your direction. And primarily, these are tools that would provide a financial incentive. So just to look back, we are looking at priority strategies. There were several other tools and suggestions around ways we can encourage needed housing, but today we're just looking at a few of the priority strategies that were recommended for implementation. And one of those is the affordable housing construction excise tax, and I just wanted to note that it was in the memo, but we are required to evaluate this as part of the middle housing requirement that we had with House Bill 2001, and the state approved delaying this discussion, knowing that we were adopting the housing implementation plan and that was going to be in there. So I just wanted to note that. And with that, I'm going to introduce Brendan Buckley. He is with Johnson Economics. He is on our consultant team and prepared the report, and he is going to be giving the presentation along with me, and we will be able to ask questions. And what we want to do is work through the strategies and then have discussion at the end. But feel free to, if you have a question about something while we're going along that is just minor, we can stop for that. Okay?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Brendan Buckley. I'm with the consulting firm Johnson Economics. We're part of the team that's been working with Albany on housing projections and planning issues going back a few years now. And some of you, I think, I recognize from before COVID, but it's been a while since I've been here in person. So it's nice to be back and continuing this work. So I helped work on this background report on these policies, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'm going to review what each of them involve, and then, of course, I'm here for any discussion or questions that you have. So as we get into this and we talk about what it means to start adopting these policies for housing implementation, there's a few things to keep in mind. One is that right now the conditions for a lot of housing development are difficult. So obviously it's the real estate development market is like any other part of the economy. It has ups and downs, and we've been in a difficult place for a while, especially having to do with costs of materials and labor and interest rates for the developers to finance their projects. So that's kind of the current conditions, and as we looked at development economics, that's what we're seeing today. But as I said, this is a cycle, and there's ups and downs, and these periods are going to get easier and harder to build housing. So as we look at these tools, basically modern affordable housing projects, as they get built, usually use layers of a lot of different tools and funding sources. They're very complex projects. And so when you as a city look to potentially implement tools, what you're usually thinking in terms of is not how do you put together X amount of money to build a housing project yourself. That's usually not the business of most cities anyway, is building real estate. What you're looking at is how can we find different tools, perhaps that work a little differently, that can go into helping people who are looking to do affordable or other needed types of housing to get these projects done, one part of the puzzle. And as we talk today, an affordable housing is a major focus of these efforts, but you'll also hear me maybe mention needed housing sometimes. So these tools are often also used in a different context to get housing, for instance, in town centers, for instance, mixed-use housing. So other types that may be market rate, but may not be happening on their own or being developed by the private real estate market, and could also use these types of incentives if that meets the city's goals. So we have many examples now. As you know, cities, the state is giving direction across the state for cities to consider a lot of these different tools. So we have a lot of different examples of these being put into place. So the strategies we're talking about today are three, and these again were ones that were emphasized in the last round of the housing implementation plan. The first is using surplus land that the city or partner agencies might own in order to try to get affordable or needed housing built on those parcels. The second is tax abatement programs, and the third is a construction excise tax. And I'll be talking about how these are different, but one thing to keep in mind is that these all three do work in slightly different ways. So for instance, tax abatement program is a way of reducing costs for the developer. A construction excise tax, as we'll talk about, is a way to perhaps contribute directly. So it's more of a positive incentive. Tax abatements are more of an operating incentive. And finally, surplus land, which is where I'll start, is about sort of controlling what happens in specific areas. So a policy of using surplus land for affordable or needed housing simply means looking at any land that the city might own for any reason that may have ended up being underutilized. It may be, an obsolete facility. It may be open space or parking, those types of things that have never been properly utilized or have become redundant. So through different ways, agencies can end up with land that's not being used anymore. And what we're talking about here is really coming up with an affirmative policy. Does the city want to say, we want housing to be a consideration or a priority when we look at what to do with these lands? That doesn't mean that a specific parcel may not end up having something that is a higher priority than housing. It's just would be a statement of that this is something you would like to prioritize if other uses are not necessary. So the current process is a little less directed, probably parcel by parcel as opportunities come up. So the advantage is that you make you're more intentional about it by having a policy set out. You can control what happens on individual properties. So advantages are when you own a piece of land, you can control what happens there. If someone comes forward with a proposal that meets none of the city's goals, you just say no. And the other benefit is obviously that land to a developer has a certain value, dollar value attached to it, so it can become an incentive to offer. So the city actually has examples of having done this. It's been quite a while now, but there's a couple examples of ceding surplus land to Habitat for Humanity to build a few units. So this is something that has been done, and that's an example. So in terms of how you would do this, at this point, we can come up with some process recommendations of how the city might implement this, but it's really about probably doing a full inventory of your surplus lands and looking at appropriateness for housing. Some of them may not even have the proper zoning, or you may have a parcel, but it's next to the freeway or something like that. So it's kind of doing a screen first to see what you have, and then deciding how you'd like to, if you'd like to prioritize housing, what that housing might be. Again, it might be prioritizing affordable housing, like subsidized affordable housing, or it could be other types of needed housing. And generally, so what you're doing is you're, again, not doing this yourself. You're using the land as an incentive and a possible way to entice a partner developer through a proposal process to come help partner on that. You can make sure they have the experience and track record to make sure you're confident. And then there's a full flexibility about what that means. You can sell a parcel of land for full value. You can offer a discount. There are land leases, meaning that the public owns the land and leases it. Usually that's something very long, like 99 years. But there's full flexibility on how you do that. In the packet we gave you, there are some detailed case studies presented. I won't go through all those, but here's some examples of projects that were built on land. Some of these were owned by cities, but there's other examples of owned by transit agencies, owned by a county. Obviously, as a city, you have less control over that, but if you have properties within your city that that partner agencies, the state even owns, that are being underused, you can enter in discussions with them about that, and you might have other incentives like the next tools we're going to talk about to sort of participate in that. But so these are all examples of added housing. Some of these are affordable. The project in Tigard was in their city center on a very large parcel they had for their public works. And that had become, the public works operation was moving off-site. And so they got a lot of market rate housing built there because they just wanted more population density in their town center. So they got that built, and it's a couple hundred units, I believe. So that's a quick overview of the surplus land tools. I'm going to talk about the tax abatement programs, which is the next tools. The city has had a tax abatement program on the books for a while for nonprofit affordable housing developers. That has experienced some use. That requires that those folks come back for renewal every year. And it also does not include for-profit developers. So that's something we'll talk about in a minute. Tax abatement offers obviously temporary tax savings to the operator, whoever ends up owning and operating these facilities. And so in turn for that, they are offering public benefits in return. What it does is it helps to reduce costs for the developer so that they can then offer those units at an affordable rate. It might not otherwise be might not otherwise pencil out for a market rate project. And then the abatement can apply only to city taxes, or if you want to work with other taxing jurisdiction partners, you can get it to apply to the entire amount of their tax levy if you can get agreement from other jurisdictions and partner on that. So today we wanted to talk about two different options. These were identified again in the implementation plan. These would be likely in replacement of the one you have, so especially this first one. And basically, this is a similar to the abatement you have in place, but what this does is it applies also to for-profit developers as long as they can still offer affordable units. It's a little more, it's saying, hey, if you come to us and you're saying you can offer affordable units, then we're willing to work with for-profit developers and the nonprofit agencies. It's a longer abatement of 20 years, and you have to set the rules according to statute that it's affordable at least 60% median income. You also have the flexibility to add some of your own rules and perhaps other affordability levels as long as it's less than that. And again, that would probably replace your current program. The second tax abatement is something the city has under consideration, and that is the Transit Supportive Multi-Unit Development Abatement, sometimes called a MUPD by a few different cities. That's a 10-year abatement, and this can apply to market rate development, and this is one that often is used for more of those other types of needed housing I was mentioning. So transit-oriented development, mixed-use development, getting more vertical dense development in town centers is a common use for this tool. Again, very flexible in how you design it. You may actually add affordable requirements to it, and any number of public benefits that you would like the applicant to meet. We've done some work on these. It was a while ago now, but we helped the city of Portland kind of clean up their program, which is a few decades old, but they had amassed a lot of different kind of public benefits to choose from in this long menu. And what we found is you want to keep it kind of focused, because if you have a really long menu, 90% of them won't get used, and the developers will figure out which ones are the easiest to use, and they'll use those. So,
Question?
yes.
Could you give me a definition of transit-oriented development? Is it just vertical housing? Is that what that's referring to?
It usually applies to a couple different things. One is distance to a transit corridor.
Okay.
So, buses. And then the other thing it might mean is density, or being kind of more in a town center type development. So the idea is not just to have housing near transit, but then also build more housing near transit. So that's where the density comes in.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good, thanks. And just, that economic development is working on this and has already brought you a bunch of information and is going to be bringing back more details about this. But it is a tool that the Housing Implementation Plan does recommend, because we need all types of housing. Mm-hmm.
So those are the two types of tax abatements, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions about those at the end here or now. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, so I know you were not included in this conversation previously, but I had a question about having for the MUPDs, having, I believe it was Sophie I spoke to about this several months ago, having us based on like a type of housing or quantity, so it isn't like a flat 10-year property tax abatement. So is that a possibility?
To have it based on specific types,
Yeah,
you
having
said?
specific parameters in place, so it wouldn't go towards automatically 10 years if they're only supplying like 2 units of affordable housing. I'm not sure if there's like a way to do that, like a rubric.
It's up to 10 years, so you can have scaled. So maybe you want to have a 5-year abatement for a certain type of housing, and those are details that you can work through. But it is for mixed-use development, and then one of your public benefits can be that you're providing affordable housing. And instead of providing affordable housing, you might have an in lieu of fee. But my understanding is the abatement maximum is 10 years, and you can do any variation of that. So it doesn't have to be a full 10 years, but it could be scaled based on what the benefits are.
Historically, have we ever scaled MUPDs, or have we always done 10 years?
We don't have a MUPD program. We don't have it. Cities are starting to adopt this tool. Corvallis just adopted it a couple years ago, and they're just starting to see their first applications come in. Other cities have had them. It's a tool that we don't have in our toolbox that we think is necessary, especially when other cities that are similar in size and close to us have these great tools in their toolbox. We are sort of competing against other cities for housing and mixed-use housing and other types of development.
Excellent. We've been talking about it for so long. I thought we already had something in place.
No, hopefully soon. I know they're working with the taxing jurisdictions to talk to them about it, but also they've come up with a list of potential public benefits that you'll want to consider, especially given Brendan's input and what are the most important benefits that we need right now, in exchange for the abatement.
Excellent. Thank you.
Counselor McGee, do you have any questions?
I do not.
Thank you. Please.
Thanks. So the final of the three policy tools we're talking about today is a construction excise tax. It is a tax that's placed on new construction. It's based on the permit valuation at the time of construction. So this is, again, allowed by a state statute and is starting to get adopted by quite a few cities across the state. And it allows up to a 1% tax on residential construction and then unlimited on commercial construction. The residential CET needs to be used on affordable housing programs, and the statute kind of breaks down how that can be used. And then with the commercial CET, 50% needs to be used that way, but then you could also use the other 50% to do essentially any number of other things. It doesn't have that the affordable housing requirement. The examples that we looked at, there's some in the packet, but basically cities have adopted a range. The low is about 1/3% up to 1.5% that some cities, or I think one example, has applied to their commercial, on their commercial side. 1% was the most common, and it's also very common to just set the same level for both residential and commercial, though you don't have to. And nor do you have to have both. You can choose one or the other.
Counselor Montague has a question.
So you're saying that 50% has to be used for affordable housing programs. Could the other 50% be used to help fund maybe like a MUMPD or does it matter? Does this just go into the general fund and we can use it however?
The money would go into a housing fund, and it would, you determine what programs are eligible so that and that's something we're going to ask you about here in a few minutes, but you would determine the programs, and those programs can change as needs change, but it is going to be housing related.
All of it.
Yeah, but the MUPD is intended to encourage housing in a mixed-use setting, right? So if you look at some of these examples, I don't remember if some of them layered CET and MUPD, but different projects in different locations, they need different incentives that help them either with their operating costs over the first 10 years or whether it's an incentive that helps them get state money. Usually there is a financial local contribution that's expected, and that can either be in a surplus property or in a money. So different tools and combinations are needed, but they could potentially be used in combination. But you would agree to how the funds would be used.
Okay.
So that it wouldn't just be open. Yeah.
Thank you.
Counselor Robsinski?
Okay, I'm going to try and simplify it for me. I'm trying to understand how adding, say, 1% tax onto a developer of any kind is going to incentivize them to reduce their costs somehow to come up with affordable housing.
So the tax is going to go into a fund, and then those dollars will be used to incentivize the kind of housing that we need. There isn't an incentive for anyone that just comes to the counter right away. It'll take a while to build up a pot of money. So there is not an incentive for everybody that comes in and pays the tax. The tax is a way for you to raise money, because right now we don't have a pot of money to help incentivize especially affordable housing. And this is one of the tools that is, a lot of cities smaller than us and of course larger are using this tool. They're raising money and they're able to, we can give this project $450,000. Well, they can use that money to bring in, $20 million. But not every residential project is going to be eligible for getting a benefit from the funds.
So it may be more effective for a larger scale project, is what you're implying.
It would apply to all residential development. That is, there are some exemptions. There's also a list of exemptions for certain types of development, like schools and affordable housing, but it would apply for all new construction. I don't think it would apply for there's some more details in your packet, but not for rehabbing an existing single-family dwelling, but it would apply to, it's just a way to raise money, and it's just a cost at the building permit. So we already charge, the school district already charges a CET, and they just pay it at the time of building permit, and that's collected and given to the school district. So this would just be another tax that's collected by the city, but it goes into a specific fund that is dedicated to developing programs that support affordable housing, and then if you choose to, for the area where you have some flexibility for other needed housing types.
Thank you.
Counselor Smith?
You answered my question that I had, but not directly. This would be, and not your fault, because I hadn't asked the question. The tax would be assessed based on the cost of building permits, correct? That's what I thought I remembered reading in the packet.
Counselor Novak, you have
That's
something?
correct.
So let me understand that cost of building permit, 1%, 1.5%. Now, the question we all have as elected officials, will we have to go to voters for this?
No. This is one of the tools that does not require going to the voters, where like a bond or something like that would. So this is something like Corvallis adopted theirs. Bend is the first one that came out before the state kind of brought up this as a tool. It's a council decision. And we had a really good conversation with Corvallis staff, because they went through a similar process that you're going through. And, will this raise costs on development? And it usually, it doesn't really impact their research is it doesn't necessarily impact the cost of a project. It usually happens at the sale of the property. It was kind of interesting, just if you know more about where costs come in with the development, they pre-program it, and it just becomes part of the costs that, they do get passed on to maybe a homeowner, but it is a tool that is starting to really see some results in other communities. Corvallis has got 435 units under construction right now, and they're not all by nonprofit affordable housing developers. They are by for-profit affordable housing developers. It's really interesting. Having that tool has kind of opened up housing in their community.
I've
Counselor
seen,
Newman up there.
And I went beyond answering that question. I'm really sorry.
No, that's fine.
And because we do want to discuss this later, but.
Okay.
so that just reminded me of something. I was talking to a friend who is focused on affordable housing in Corvallis specifically. They said, for one of these developments, they mentioned that you're going to need like $48,000 income to prove, and that isn't true. But they're saying true affordable housing to like prove that, like with the I think they were asking for like the down payment. What is it? Like the
Down payment assistance?
Yeah, not down payment like where you're buying it, but for your between the application fees, first month's rent, last month's rent, and then the proof of the, I think it was $48,000 wasn't really truly like affordable. So I was just curious, since these are for-profit,
So
just wanted to.
I think what your question is, how do we ensure people with the incomes that meet the different income levels are occupying the units? Is that kind of what your question
Thank you.
is?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry. Thanks for.
Well, so usually this tool, and this is what we would recommend just initially, is used to leverage outside resources. State funding, there's a program, the LIFT program, it's an abbreviation, but it really helps with rental and home ownership housing that's affordable to households at 60% or below or 80% or below. And they have an affordability period of 60 years. Usually the state funds do minimum, and Corvallis has adopted a 60-year affordability period. The state, when you use this program to leverage state funds, the state is monitoring that affordability period, but you'd want to make sure that that you've got conditions on those funds that ensure that. But that's the easiest way. But they've got, they have a whole program in place, and they're monitored to ensure that they are doing this. And it is an affordable housing development. It's just not owned by a nonprofit. So it's managed and operated the same as it would be if it was owned by a nonprofit. And a nonprofit developer can also, apply for these funds and use these funds. But basically, you are in income verifying every applicant that comes in the door based on the current income limits at the time. And that's either rental or for the homeownership program.
Okay. Yeah, is there a positive or negative between working with nonprofit builders versus for-profit builders, or any difference?
No, not really, especially if you've got a 60-year affordability period. Now, I'm mentioning that we haven't talked about program details, but that is the number that's kind of the low, the number that the state wants to see when anyone's applying for state funding. And you're also looking at trying to target resources when you're getting state funding to those that are at the lowest end of the affordability spectrum. It's usually at 60% below where most of our greatest housing needs are. So the main thing, you want somebody that's able to build housing. And I think that Oregon's incentive program has started to attract builders that do manage large portfolios of affordable housing. We actually had one of them, Lincoln Avenue Capital, looking at us, and then Corvallis also. Their portfolio is affordable housing because they know how to bring in the resources that are needed to make that project affordable over the long term. And that incentive requires them to put that money back into lowered rents over that 60-year period.
So the question I have is that, so Councilor Novak asked the question about where the money will go. So the CEZ tax revenue will go into a specific fund just for this. Now, would the developer have to apply for those funds and prove it, like a pro forma?
Yep.
Kind of show us what they would actually need?
Yep.
And also what other monies they're going to leverage to build the project? Is that what I'm
That's
understanding?
correct. Yeah, so, we're talking about it now, I might as well just talk about it. There would be program requirements, so a certain amount of this money has to be set aside for developer incentives. A certain amount of money, 15% of the funds would actually, this is just the residential portion, I think, goes to the state for home ownership programs, but it comes back directly to the city. So we would have nonprofits that would build affordable housing, for example, Deb Northwest or somebody like that. There's now a pot of money that's sort of for Albany so that they could then go apply for those funds and help build home ownership opportunities in Albany. But yeah, that money, you would determine the programs, and many cities use their version of the Community Development Commission to, they have CDBG programs and home programs where they're looking at what are our greatest needs and then how can we supplement the CDBG or other sources of funds with these programs. But you can determine who who wants to take a first stab at what our program needs are, and then it would be your decision. What are our program needs and what kind of programs are we going to do once we build up a pot of revenue? So that's actually what we want to talk about, but maybe I'll let Brendan finish his presentation because we've
Well, sorry, Brendan, we just have.
naturally. That's okay.
We have
Oh,
questions.
You guys
this is
have
why we
already covered everything.
We wanted
It
to
makes it
budget an
easy.
hour just because of this kind of stuff. So.
I will quickly review. I think these are all the kinds of things that Ann was talking about. But yeah, so the program, basically you're taxing all development to create this pot to use on affordable housing projects. I think an important thing to emphasize, and we talked quite a bit with Corvallis about their program and the success they've had, is you're not trying to get these funds to build up to a level where you're building your own projects, as I mentioned earlier. This is about leveraging your little incentives and investments to make the project successful, help them. Sometimes just the demonstration of local commitment is important to the state to see, for them to then release tax credits and a much larger amount of funding. So all these things are really important. And they can be used for some of the developer incentives. She mentioned that I believe it's 50% of the residential has to be used for what's called developer incentives. So that might be helping them with their fees, development fees, system development charges for things like roads and parks and things. Well, if a city doesn't have a CET and wants to offer those benefits, they may just be doing without collecting that money. This is actually a way for you to use CET to make sure the city is still getting to sort of backfill, right? You're still getting your system development charges for parks and roads and so on. So that's a quick review. We did cover some of that. Yes.
I do one more question. I'm sorry about this. Could this be used in conjunction with the MUPD? Or that's one program or the other?
It could be, but this will, depending on how you structure the program, the MUPD may not, the development with the MUPD may not actually have it be all affordable units, for example, and so it could be that if you set aside some money to incentivize the affordable units or just housing, that you could use some of the money to offset SDCs for housing that is needed and it's going into a location that you really want it. But again, most of the funds need to be allocated to programs, typically 60% or below median income. But yes, I mean, these are things that you would get to decide, thankfully, other cities have gone through this process, so we can see what other cities are doing. And there's some commonalities, and then there's some areas where there's a little bit of diversity, and that's an opportunity for you to determine, we really want to support the downtown area or our new climate-friendly area development, and how can we also layer in CET programs for that?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Is that it?
Not quite.
Okay.
So there are some dollar estimates in the report. This is the slide that's been up, but basically we looked at the value of permits over the past 5 years. This is an example of just using that average of those permit values, what the annual growth of this fund could be, and broken down by different percentage levels you might set it at. So, but you can see that it can end up to add up to a substantial amount of money annually. And I think Corvallis mentioned that they took about 2 or 3 years to build up their pot. So you just got to get it kind of revving, and then you'll have a base you can work off of. So we wanted to have some discussion of the CET. We had some, but are there other questions or other thoughts on this? And I know Ann was there specific?
Yeah, well, we have a couple slides on timeline, but we did want to really get any of your thoughts, concerns, ideas, initial thoughts, because we do want to bring back something that incorporates any input you get today. And also, if you'd like us to try to work with any group of existing group or a different group to start fleshing out program ideas. Now, what can happen, and some cities do, is they go ahead and enable this tool by adopting the ordinance, and then they say per the city's housing programs. And then once you know that the tool has been adopted through the ordinance, you then can go and develop your plan. So all the details of how you might use the funds don't have to be determined before you adopt the tool. It'll take a while for money to build up, so you do have time to figure out some of those details. But we definitely want to know this is something you have to consider. If you have any thoughts about it now, yes, maybe this rate for residential, this for commercial, or just commercial. One thing we didn't talk a lot about, and it's in your packet, but there are exemptions from the tax, and there are some exemptions that are in state law, so I did include some of the ORS language for that. Some of the things you normally think of as being exempt from the tax, but you could determine that permits under a certain value are exempt for residential or whatever. So, I mean, there are things that you could consider, and if there are things you want to know more about that we can bring back to you, I just wanted to tell you what we're planning to do. Public engagement, we are holding focus groups on all of our tools in the toolbox that we're looking at right now. That's these, but also development code. So we'll be having focus groups. We'll also be doing a public survey, and we are coming back to you in September, end of September, with the Planning Commission to talk about the development code changes. But as far as a timeline goes for these tools that are in your packet here, we want to make sure that we've gotten a kind of a thumbs up on all of them, but any information you want us to bring back, because right now, the way the schedule is, we will gather public input, and then we'll work on drafting these with as much input as you've gotten, and maybe from the public, or also from the public, and then we would come back to you. Right now, we're slated to come back to you in January. That's our schedule with a consultant, but if you'd like check-ins before then, we can budget that in. And then we would bring back more details about each of the programs, and then you would still have time before we look at moving into adoption to make adjustments to what we brought back. But if you have any thoughts about any of the programs that we can then begin working on, we just want to take as much direction as possible today.
So Councilor Smith, turn her mic on.
Thank you. The least attractive of the options to me is the surplus land. We don't have much surplus land, and when those things come up, we decide what we want to do with it anyway. I'd like to just see that process continue rather than make it a regular
thing,
yeah. I do like the idea of MUPTI and the construction excise tax. I like the idea of keeping the excise tax directed at affordable housing,
Amen to that too.
period. However that works out in writing the code. But those are my views. Thank you.
Councilor Novak?
That was exactly where I was headed. So I just want to second that, both counts. Surplus land, no. And I would like to keep things focused on the CET, on low-income, nonprofit providers, so that it stays that way. And how did our former mayor put it? I really appreciated this. Assist the projects through the construction excise tax for nonprofit low-income housing providers only, so the city can be assured the housing will stay low-income and lessen the burden on city staff for annual recertification of a project's tenant incomes. It just makes sense.
You're talking about for the tax
Okay,
abatement?
wait, slow down.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Go ahead, Anna Teresa.
I just wanted to clarify your comment. I can go listen back to it. You're recommending some of what Sharon Canopa provided?
Yes.
for the tax abatement program or for the CET? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Well, for both, actually. I liked how she laid it out, and I am actually very much in agreement with that. So since you mentioned her by name, I would say that I personally favor things the way she laid them out in that letter. I 100% agree with those thoughts.
Counselor Newton Azar?
Yes, my question is in regards to the public engagement that's planned. How would someone or someone's developer group meetings, the code revisions for the focus groups, how would folks get involved in those?
Well, we're going to be sending out emails and getting stuff on social media. Hopefully those emails will start going out tomorrow. We are working on it. So we have our email list from the Housing Implementation Plan. We'll start with that and then doing some social media. But yeah, it is open to anyone that wants to talk. So we haven't talked about the housing strategies in the development code. Those are the ones that we really want to make sure work. And, they may be a great idea. Do they really work? But we also want to get public input, and we'll be, in addition to the focus groups, we'll also be doing a survey. But these tools that we're bringing towards you today end up really being your decision. Of course, development code amendments are also, but your input will greatly influence how we shape the package for the policy, because these are ones that may impact the budget and, that kind of, so.
Counselor Kopczynski?
Jackie was first.
Oh, Counselor Jackie? Counselor Montague, I'm sorry.
You could call me Counselor Jackie, it's fine. Okay, so unlike the other comments, I do find value in doing a inventory of our surplus land. I am not in favor of just selling it all off just because we have it, but I think that there is a very great need for affordable housing right now, and if we have that land right now that is right for whatever project, we should be looking at that. So I think that looking at our surplus land, and maybe I think that should be a regular exercise anyway, that we should be inventorying that and looking at our current needs and comparing that to, just on a regular basis. So, and then figure out our needs and options. On the tax abatement, I'm definitely in favor of looking at the different options. MUMPTY, I'm excited to see what Sophie has for us for that. And then on the CET, I think that we should be applying that to residential, commercial, and industrial. Obviously, without minus the exemptions that we have to, kind of provide. Like, I wouldn't want us to tax something that's coming in that's low income. I think that looking at threshold permit dollar value is probably good for administrative burden, something that's not going to really pay for itself would probably be a good exercise to do. As far as tax rate, anything over 1% I think is a good idea. It looks like from your report that 1% and more didn't really have that you could find a impact on development. So if that's not going to impact developers' decisions to develop here, then I think that we should try to capture as much as we can as soon as possible, because like you said, it takes a while to build up that pot. And so the more we charge now, the quicker we can get those funds available for the folks that really need it right now. And I think that answers all the questions. So I'm good.
You have something else?
I do. The state law limits the tax on residential development to 1%, doesn't it?
Yep.
Okay. I wanted to clarify also that I would not limit the CET to nonprofit affordable housing development, but for-profit developers who plan to develop affordable housing, given that the 60-year the timeline is in place and is monitored by the state regardless of who does the building. I think the land inventory is a good idea. We've done that in the past, and I think we are surprised when we find out what's on the inventory. It's a lot of little
Slivers.
rights of way, and
Slivers.
we don't have a lot of undeveloped you
Yeah,
know,
that's correct.
big pieces of property. However, there may be other public entities that have underutilized property, and I like that idea. I don't know if public entities or if there are commercial buildings that may be available that we don't have, well, I'm starting to ramble again, but the inventory is, I think, will be disappointing.
So thank you very much, council. I would like to ask, Councilor Kupczynski was next.
And McGee.
Thank you. I like the analogy of a quiver. We're developing, or a lot of programs are coming down the pike that we have an opportunity to utilize. My only concern is, and I'll lay my fears here, does city staff have enough bandwidth to keep working on these programs to keep them going? Because nobody has the panacea to solve all the problems. And it seems like we're just getting more and more little processes that have to be developed, and that's very time consuming and expensive in and of itself.
So that's a good question. Well, these are tools that aren't used very often, right? But I mean, they're tools that are available, and I think that it's important that we do make the time for them. In addition, the state, with the housing needs analysis rulemaking, we're going to have to make sure that we're utilizing a lot of tools, because we're actually going to have to count how many affordable units and housing units we're building. So one of the things that the CET does allow for is 4% of the, up to 4% of the tax received can be put towards administering that program. We already are allocating staff resources towards managing the community development program, and if it's a natural fit to have that community development commission evaluate some of the housing program needs, we have that already built into our budget. But it is a good concern. Corvallis thought they needed a whole person to manage their programs, and realized we don't need a whole person to do that. They can do that because they already have other programs going on. So we would need to figure out what that time would be, but we could use up to 4% if we needed to ensure the program was being administered. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for planning staff. It could be whoever is administering the program.
So one thing we haven't done is gone to Councilor McGee. So Councilor McGee, do you have anything?
I do. I have two things. One, the public engagement timeline is pretty good. It seems a little ambitious. I hope that we can stick to that timeline.
Back on the slide.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other one is there was a term used earlier in the presentation, subsidized affordable housing. Are those one and the same? I've usually heard those used differently, not together. Can you give a little clarification on that?
Before you do that, can you go back on the timeline, because it skipped forward? Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So as housing affordability has become a bigger issue everywhere, the way that term is used has evolved a little bit. So sometimes, depending on the conversation, people are talking about affordability basically for almost everyone, whether, wherever they are on the income spectrum, because housing has been short. But so sometimes we say subsidized affordable housing basically to mean any program that is specifically designed to be affordable housing, has some kind of program attached to it, keeping the affordability level at a certain level.
Okay.
And that's mostly what we've been talking about here is subsidized affordable housing that's intentionally will be kept at affordable levels.
Right. And I think the affordable is relative, but needless to say, I know what affordable housing constitutes as. I just have never heard subsidized affordable housing. So it's usually one or the other.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Ann, you mentioned that one is to check in. So I think after the public input, before it's formalizing the policy program, I think the council would like to hear some of the public comment.
Sure. We can add that to the work session.
Just be a milestone, just check it in and say.
Yep,
Okay.
yep.
I think that'd be good there.
I'm sorry, I had one other thing. I apologize.
Go ahead.
For the public engagement piece, is there any incentives for the public to engage, like, I don't know, gift cards or something to get more people, to make it more attractive? Because I feel like every time that there's a focus group, sometimes it's a very small focus group. And as Counselor Azar stated, I think that it's important to try to really get the public's input. And I think one way of doing it is making it a little bit more attractive than it has been in the past for folks to participate.
That's a good question. I'll have to, we'll have to talk to Matthew about our budget. But yeah, it's hard because this public engagement is really specific about certain housing types, and it's building on public engagement that we've had throughout the middle housing and the housing implementation development. But I think that's really good, especially when you're trying to get new ideas and all of that. This is really narrow, but we'll see if we can figure out something. We know that people's time is valuable, and we do appreciate the input, so from the public as well as from the council.
So is that presentation almost done?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so one of the things that I'm on the board of directors that we're planning to build some affordable units for veterans specifically. And their goal is not to use federal funds because of the strings that are attached to that. So we're pursuing state funds, which has less constraints and less requirements going forward. So private developers that build not affordable housing would be, I think, attuned to both. They would like, one would do one would do the other, but we need to have it not just nonprofit developers, but for-profit developers as well.
Yeah, the state does have affordability requirements when you get those funds, and then they do have a monitoring staff available, so you can ensure that a for-profit developer will have that.
Dotting their i's and crossing their t's.
Yep.
Thank you. Great presentation. We look forward to hearing back from you.
Okay, well, we will see you.
Can we send-
Enjoy
can
your
you-
break if I don't see you, and we will see you back in September.
Can you send this slide set to us? Is
Sure.
that possible? Thank you.
Yes.
Guys, is that okay with y'all? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next on tonight's agenda is item number 4, Pacific Power Conversion Agreement. I think Matthew Harrington is standing in for,
Mr. Mayor, Matthew will be taking care of the presentation.
Matthew Ruckers.
Yes.
Okay, Matthew Ruckers will be staying in the presentation.
Sophie
you changed your hair.
and her husband Garrett are expecting a baby, and that arrival time is now tomorrow. So
Director Ruckers.
How do you follow that?
Yeah, you kind of, he left you hanging.
We're gonna go from that to this, but, so good evening, Mayor and Councilor. So I'm here to talk to you about briefly, the agreement to it's the conversion agreement with Pacific Power and the City of Albany for the conversion of underground utilities associated with the waterfront project. And I'll kind of back up just here a little bit to tell a little bit of a story so I can make a comparison. So any development that occurs in the city, whether it be, any private development, whether it be a subdivision or a commercial property, by the development code is required to underground its utilities. That's all the utilities. So the Waterfront Avenue project took a land use action. So it required a land use process. So we treat ourselves just like we treat any other developer that's out there. So we follow the same process. We're required to underground those utilities. Now this is where starts to become a little bit of a difference. In the private sector side, private developer, the Pacific Corp would actually go to them, or whether it be Pacific Corp or CPI, but in this case, Pacific Corp would go to them and say, we tell them you're required to underground the utilities. Pacific Corp would look at them and say, you're required to basically pay us to underground those facilities. This is where the city's a little bit different in that we have a franchise agreement with Pacific Corp that specifically states, it's in AMC 304-160. It talks specifically to underground conversions. And I'll skip forward one sentence in. The expense of such a conversion shall be paid by the grantee, in this case, Pacific Corp. But the grantee may recover its cost from its customers in according with the state statute, administrative rule, or regulation, including but not limited to its references in OAR 860-022-0046. Nothing in this subsection shall prevent the city and grantee from agreeing on a case-by-case basis to a different form of cost recovery or another mechanism for funding an underground project that is consistent with the state statutes and administrative rules. So it actually, as I mentioned there, it's actually on the, I think I missed a piece of this. So it does provide, I didn't print the right chunk of the development code, so I'll go back to my memo. So it does provide an opportunity for Pacific Corp, the grantee, to recover some or all of its costs from the ratepayers or its customers. So that's not a decision that the city gets to make. So the story is with our franchise agreement, we are a little bit different in that we don't have to pay for the undergrounding of that because we've already covered it in our franchise agreement. Now, Pacific Corp, while they're required to underground, when we tell them it needs to be underground, they have a choice to either absorb those costs or pass it on to the ratepayers. And in this particular case, Pacific Corp has made the choice to pass that on to the ratepayers. And as part of that process, the city has negotiated a 2-year window for that kind of payback or passing the cost on or recouping that cost from the ratepayers, where they could do it for only a year. Now, the big question is, well, what does that mean for the ratepayers of Albany? And from Pacific Corp, what we're seeing is over the 2-year period, the monthly cost is going to be right around, and again, these are not, it'll depend on final project costs, things like that, but we're estimating right around $4 to $4.24 with the interest rate that they've projected in cost. So it's going to be right around that $4 mark is what we're talking about per month for that 2 years. So this agreement basically memorializes the agreement between the city and Pacific Corp to collect that, allowing Pacific Corp to collect that over that 2-year period. And basically, we are here to ask for council's permission to enter into that agreement, and I'm here to answer any questions that you might have.
I do
Councilors?
have a question.
Councilor Novak?
Yeah, clarification. So Pacific Power is asking for 2 years of increasing the rate on the ratepayers at an interest rate of 5% or with an additional 5%? Because it read to me, maybe I misread it, but it read to me as if they were also adding a 5% interest charge.
So the overall cost, if we go down into the agreement, was 2.4 million, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2.379 with a 5.1% interest rate on that. So they're charging an interest rate.
Why?
That would be a question for Pacific Power. We don't.
But you negotiated with them.
Year, and the city wouldn't have anything involved in that other than Pacific Corp has to go to the PUC or Public Utility Commission for approval. I suppose that the city could object in the PUC meetings, but the whole reason for the agreement is to spread it out over 2 years. As far as setting of the interest rate, I personally didn't negotiate the agreement. I'm here representing it. I'm sure. Excuse me. I'm sure there were good reasons there of why it was set up the way it was. Certainly, there's a cost borne by Pacific Power as they're fronting the cost for these improvements, which is probably why we see an interest rate there. And that's just a guess.
Okay, so just to clarify, I appreciate the fact that you negotiated for 2 years instead of 1 year because it would have been a higher amount. And they're already raising their rates right now, 11.9%, which is $21.49 a month on every ratepayer, $21.49 plus this, which I really can't countenance and do not wish to support at all. But that's why I asked the question, is it repaying them what they spend to underground with an additional 5% on top? Because that's how it read to me. And I'm still not clear on that.
Matthew, if I may. Sure. If you paid, in theory, if you paid a 2.379 million today, you'd get it for 2.379 million. But if you buy a car today and you ask to pay for it over time, there will be an interest rate. It has to do with the time value of money.
Okay, so getting that additional year, the trade-off was you get to pay a 5% additional interest rate.
I suspect if it was 1 year, there would have been an interest rate as well. It just would have been
suspect
paid
so
over
also.
1 year.
Yeah. I tried to find information on the profit from Pacific Power. You can't find it anywhere. They're a bajillion-dollar company. I really take issue with this, and I don't feel compelled to support it. I just don't.
Counselor Kopczynski. Counselor Newton, Azar.
Oh, there we go, it's working. Is there a different rate for residential or business? Is it for every connected?
It's for, there's not a differential between residential and commercial, it's the same rate.
So over 24 months, if it's 424, it's like $101.76 total that and it's every single person, not just the CARA district.
That is my understanding, yes.
Were there any additional CARA funds that could help offset this? I know that, I'm not sure if we're, have any additional money from the waterfront project to buy down the rate or?
But currently, the maximum indebtedness, we were going through, taking a look at what that was. So basically, the ability to take on additional debt that potentially could offset that. We don't know what that maximum indebtedness is yet, as we're still waiting on some year-end financials to be able to determine that. So it's a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have those answers today.
When we do get that, I don't know this for certain, but I'd ask Gina Yeager to confirm for me. But when we do have that information, I suspect that we could buy that down at the time. So if it's 6 months from now or 12 months from now, we could make an extra payment on that if that money was available.
If there were council desires to say offset some of that cost or take on some of that burden that currently is Pacific Corp's option to pass it on to the ratepayers, if we wanted to say, hey, we want to help our ratepayers once that maximum indebtedness or MI study is done, if there's that ability to take on additional debt, and the council's direction was to, yes, if there's some additional funds, can we point it at this to lessen that burden? That's something we can absolutely explore when some of those balances are available.
I think we should. Counselor Kopczynski.
Hypothetically, if we approve this, when would they start digging?
So the construction schedule, and Stacy gave me some information. So I think we're looking at starting in fall, and obviously the timing on this is everything. The longer that it's delayed, the more that it's going to cost. So and I don't say that to put pressure on the council. I'm just stating a fact is, time results in money. So I believe they're looking at fall. As long as Stacy doesn't hit me with a shoe or something, we can assume that's correct. So, and how that would work is we'd enter into the agreement. We would be scheduling our contractor, K&E, to go in and do the excavations for all the trenching. And then Pacific Power would come behind with the facilities and install them.
That includes extracting the poles and all that stuff that goes with that?
As I understand it, correct.
Counselor Novak?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, since we have a supplemental budget that we're considering, could we transfer $550,000 from economic development to this to help people straight away if you're going to move forward?
I'd have to be honest with you, Councilor Novak, I'd have to look at the numbers if there was, and probably bring something back if there were basically a specific fund that we could, if there was monies available to be able to transfer and offset some of those costs. It's when we're looking at, in a $2.4 million piece, that cost differential, just some basic math would tell me it's going to take it from, say, $4 a month per consumer down to $3.25-ish, somewhere in there. So it'd be a savings about 75% or 75 cents.
I'm just really concerned
I
about
understand.
the rates. I know too many people who are struggling, and the rates on everything are going up all the time, and it might not seem like much to some folks, but I have trouble with this.
Understand.
Noted.
Even personally, I have trouble with it.
Counselor Montague.
So just want to make sure it's very clear that we have no control over what rate increase Pacific Corp charges their customers. Also, it sounds like the only control we have right now on how much this will raise our citizens' bill is spreading this over 2 years versus 1 year to reduce that impact. So that said, I think this is a good deal. The only concern I have is if we do decide to, try to pay that down, what is that negotiable in the contract? Is there language in that contract that locks us in to that contract? Or do you think that we could probably negotiate that? What is your confidence on that?
An amendment to the contract?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we wanted to buy down the rate for Pacific Power, I don't think they're going to turn down the money. If we say, hey, we'll give you the money today as opposed to waiting a year and a half or whatever it is, they willingly would take it, I'm sure. So we could amend it if we needed to amend the contract. We could do that.
So
In
it
other words,
sounds
there's no early payment penalty.
There you go.
like, okay.
A prepayment penalty, yeah.
Yeah, so that sounds like, to me, this is our best of, the
Best
options that we have available to us today.
And just a quick note, and this is something that Sean and I can take a look at, is when we talk about it, if there ends up being, say, some funds available of what that buyback would look at, we need to dig into that a little farther to make sure that, does that require that they have to go back to the PUC for approvals, or just how that works? We'd have to look at the logistics on that. So it's just being upfront about what that would look like.
Counselor McGee, do you have anything for us?
I don't.
I have another question when you've asked everyone.
Go ahead.
What if we just don't do it? What if we just don't move forward? Things as they are.
Well,
Don't underground.
If we said we're not going to underground, that'd be setting a precedent for every development moving forward. Because like I said, every private development that occurs in the city is bound by this standard, and we'd be saying that we as the city are not bound by the same standard, which would create some serious conflict for us,
Okay,
as we
just
saying we don't have to follow the
Matthew.
same rules, which.
And lawsuits, I imagine.
Additionally, Matthew, would it not also reduce the amount of developable space that a developer would have based on setbacks?
Most of the utilities are still contained, even if they're above ground or underground, they're still kind of chewing up the same window. However, above ground utilities will chew up space that could be used for walkways or landscaping, things like that, where underground utilities is doing just that. It's putting them underground so you have, to Peter's point, more room for
Well, I do
sidewalks
understand
and
that.
things.
I just feel like at this point in time, with the rising cost of absolutely everything under the sun, my personal preference, and I know I'm only one vote, my personal preference would be work around what we have with the above ground everything. Don't try and say we're not, we don't have to be held to the same standard. Okay, I'm not asking for that. But I would just say, given the difficulty that many people, maybe not everyone, but many, many people are having trouble buying groceries, and to increase when Pacific Power is already jacking the rate 11.9%. If you actually know people for whom every dollar counts, or you happen to be one of them, and maybe you're not, I don't guess you are, it's kind of a big deal. And I kind of feel like I would just as soon, as I said, so maybe you don't have as much space to develop. Okay, you don't have as much space to develop, so what? Right now, you don't have to, I just feel like what's the rush anyway? Why not, given the economic situation that we have right now, why not just put the brakes on a little bit? Why not, in the interest of helping people and maybe lessening the burden, why add a burden when we don't absolutely have to? We're developed enough. I don't know, this is just my perspective, but that's kind of how I feel. I just as soon miss a little development or hold off a little development for a couple years, and then when things are better, if indeed they are, revisit it.
Thank you,
Thank
Counselor
you.
Novak. Counselor Smith?
Not doing this is not an option. We're so close to finishing the waterfront project. This is the end of the waterfront project. It's got to be done. And to wait for interest rates to go down, for costs to go down, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
Okay. Counselor McGee, do you have anything yet?
No, I don't.
I just don't want to forget
I
you, that's
think-
all.
No, I think that Counselor Smith sort of, she encapsulated exactly my thoughts. Not doing it is not an option. I think we have to move forward and close it out.
I just wanted to quickly, elaborate a little bit on this. Like, the reason why we want to move the utilities underground is for accessibility for folks with disabilities, correct?
There's multiple reasons why our development code has you move utilities underground, but one of those is accessibility. When you look at where most utilities poles are at, kind of smack dab in the middle of most sidewalks, and we even have construction details that show you how to basically build around with a sidewalk, a utility pole. It's not an ideal situation, so correct. And some utility poles are even very inconveniently placed in what would be an accessible ramp at a corner. So that it does provide additional challenges. But understanding that even with underground utility, you are going to have, they always have an element of above ground, like utility cabinets and things, but it provides a little bit more flexibility in that you're not stringing lines between poles, if that makes sense.
So there still may be obstacles in the way, even with undergrounding, is what I just heard you say.
What I'm saying is when you underground facilities, you're not hanging wires from a pole.
I understand.
You will still have some, for access, you could have some above ground facilities, but they're not a 20-foot power pole. They're a utility pedestal that we'll see in most neighborhoods. And those have flexibility in location with utilizing sweeps and things like that, are basically bends.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that maybe people who are listening are aware that undergrounding doesn't mean there's nothing above ground.
Correct.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Counsel, would you?
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead.
may I make two quick
Yes, go ahead.
clarifying points, just so that everybody's clear that the 5.1% rate is not added on top of Pacific Power's 11.9%. It's only on the amount of money that's being borrowed. That's one point. And the other point is that Pacific Power also, like we do, has a low-income assistance program, which is there to help anybody who's experiencing those kinds of difficulties.
I appreciate that.
Counselor Kopczynski?
And to mirror kind of what Counselor Smith was saying, understand that the whole key to the urban renewal district, or about 50% of it, was improving infrastructure as an incentive for private investment. And it's been working very, very well. And this is a key driver on doing that and completing the project, which is what we've all been aiming for 20 plus years now.
Okay, so counsel, would you like him to bring this back for further discussion, or just bring it back to us?
I think
Thumbs
we're,
up?
Weren't we asked to
Bring
approve
it back on
the
Wednesday?
contract? Is
I
that-
don't
No, that's,
you can actually, if the council desires, you can make a decision on it tonight, or if you
oh,
wanted to.
okay. I thought we were going to make a decision tonight, but
It's just basically authorizing, Peter to sign the agreement and move it forward. We can do whatever you'd like to do.
counsel?
And I have to point to the fact that Stacy has worked very hard, and Sophie has worked very hard to try to get this to you before the break, because we've been going through delay after delay on the project, so we'd like to get it going.
So counsel, we've heard discussion, we've had discussion, we've made our points to Matthew and to staff. Do I have a motion?
Can we add it to the consent calendar on Wednesday?
Yeah, are we allowed to vote during work
Yeah,
sessions?
we can.
Like,
It's our,
Council meeting.
I move to approve the attached conversion agreement between Pacific Power and City of Albany.
Second.
so, question, Counselor, do you want to add some language about prepayment to,
An addendum to the
yeah, to buy back,
contract?
buy down?
What I heard Attorney Kidd say that the current agreement in its form did not restrict us from paying it off early.
I believe that's correct. And also, if we were to add a language to it, it would have to go back to Pacific
PUC.
Power, which then would take us out of Wednesday's meeting, and then that would push us out 6 weeks, which
Okay.
we really can't.
Thank you.
Probably
Sorry
do.
about that. I just want to make sure.
Motion stands.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say no.
No.
Thank you. Motion passes 5-1.
Thank you, council.
Next on tonight's agenda is the LOC, League of Oregon Cities Legislative Priorities. City Manager Peter Trotzen, pages 42 to 60 in your packet.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Kinsey's going to put up a slide here in a minute. But thank you all for filling out your ballots that came to you a couple weeks ago and then again last Friday. Hopefully, you also had an opportunity to look through the more detailed information in the guide that LOC, the League of Oregon Cities, provided. Just to refresh your memory, the League, many cities have their own lobbyists. Either most of them are contracted, but the vast majority of cities, especially in Oregon, rely upon the League of Oregon Cities to lobby on their behalf. So the legislative priorities that you see on that slide now are ones that came up from the various policy committees. And let me take a moment to thank Matthew Rutgers. He actually served on the Community and Economic Development Committee, which looked at some of those. And your top 5, if you go to the next slide, Kinsey.
Can we ask her to blow that out, make it bigger so we can see it better? That's perfect. That works for me. Thank you.
And I think one more slide might show just the top 5. There you go. And so those top 5 show a couple of themes. One is that you collectively think that transportation and infrastructure are a big priority, and you think that housing affordability and the provision of more housing options is also a priority, which is not a surprise at all. Now, these 5, what I'll do is take these and send them back as Albany's 5 priorities. They have to be considered by the League of Oregon Cities Board, and they have to be considered in total. So all the 230 some odd cities that are members, if they've all provided a ballot with votes on it, they will consolidate them, much as we have done, and they'll look at that as the final priority list. But let me make a little footnote there. That doesn't mean that all of the other priorities fall off the priority list. It just means that when you're concentrating your effort, these are the 5 that they come up with are going to be their 5 top priorities.
For all 230 cities.
Right.
Representative, okay.
Right. And the remaining priorities will still be lobbied for by the individual lobbyists in whose portfolios they exist. They're just not at the top of the list like these are. So at this point, again, thank you. And I don't know if any of you have any questions or comments or concerns, but I'm happy to answer.
Comment on behalf of my fellow members of the Transportation Committee. Thank you for your votes for the transportation package.
Second that. Thank
And
you.
the mayors had a long, lengthy discussion at the Oregon Mayors Conference about the transportation package. And we did a similar thing just solely about transportation. And it stood out for us as something we need to make happen. So I'm really glad to see that there. And also the housing production. That's a really important thing for the entire state with our lack of housing and affordable housing to go with that. But we also must not forget there's people with jobs, with money that have housing affordability issues. And we should hopefully be able to meet their needs as well. So that's my comment.
One more comment, Mayor?
Yes.
I hope that other people read the information that was in the packet for the background on each of these topics that we were voting on. It's very interesting. There were good, full discussions of all of those topics at the number of committees. And I learned things that I didn't know by reading through those. I also served on the General Government Committee, and we talked about behavioral health and a variety of other things, recreational immunity, and so it's a very interesting session coming up.
You bring up 2 very important ones, behavioral health and recreational immunity, and those are very important. And I think the rest of them in their entirety show how complex the challenges are that face local governments and the state government today. So I would agree that it's good to read up on those if you haven't done so already.
And so one thing I would also appreciate, Peter, is if you can send that case law list I sent to you that was at the mayor's conference, because there's some things on there that could impact some of us going forward, like social media being part of your personal social media being impacted, someone's First Amendment rights. So I think that whole list would be beneficial for us to see. I think I sent it to you, Marilyn, already. Okay, that's all I have right now. So everybody good? I'm gonna move on.
I was curious how we all voted, like, what, for 1 through 5? Like, what were the numbers? Oh, maybe I
Well,
missed that one.
actually, the first slide, if you want to see a distribution amongst yourselves, I think Kinsey has that as well, but it's going to be small. There you go.
Lord have mercy.
Well, actually, that shows totals there still. There you go. Yeah, I have each of the individual ones if you need them, but
That's really cool. I was just curious to see what were our 6, 7, 8,
Yeah.
what other items we were also looking at.
yeah,
Could you put the other one back real quickly? I'm writing them down and I didn't make it all the way.
there you go.
Also,
The,
0.5.
top five.
She can just send them to you.
Oh, you sent them to me?
No, she can
Great.
just send them to
Oh,
you.
well, you could. Yeah, that'd be swell. Thank you.
There's your
Oh,
top
thank you.
5.
Shelter and homeless energy. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, council. Thank you, Peter, for that feedback, and thank you, Kinsey, for driving the bus today. Next on tonight's agenda is business from the council. I'll start with Councilor Novak, and I'll work this way.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll throw this out there, just, I don't know. Again, because we do have a supplemental budget coming up, I'm just wondering, in the interest of supporting small business and helping Sybaris complete their rehab project, if we could transfer something from economic development to assist them in that, since we have a supplemental budget underway that we're going to be voting on Wednesday. So,
Unless you have a program to do that for any business across the city, you can't just give it to one entity. Or
well,
one
I
business.
mentioned them specifically because they had come before us. And we,
Yeah.
CARA, transferring it into CARA to be specific.
Well, for one thing,
yeah.
this is not the ARA board,
I
so
know,
that would be a separate
but-
thing. But in generally speaking, and we have talked about this before, that yes, people have come before and asked for funding, but unless you have a program under the auspices of which you could advertise that program and take applications and evaluate those applications, you can't just give away funds or resources to
Okay, well,
one
you're,
entity.
yeah, you're just basically rehashing
Right.
the last time this came up. I just
Right.
thought I'd try, and there you go. I'm trying to think if there was anything I needed to,
We have Wednesday
No,
night as well.
Pardon?
We also have Wednesday night, too.
yes, I'll just say that's it for now then, and if I have anything else, I'll bring it Wednesday.
Thank you. Councilor Montague?
Yeah, I was extremely disappointed to hear about our failure in keeping Marvin's Garden open. And I want to be clear, that is our failure in keeping that open. I was wondering if we could potentially ask the Heart Board to do maybe a postmortem to look at how that was managed and maybe give some recommendations on if and how we could potentially restart that program or that site. I think that that would be a really great resource for us to understand what we did that maybe led to the failure of that or what we didn't do. So that would be my request.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Smith?
As a member of the Heart Board, I will take that to the board meeting next week.
Asked and answered.
Yeah. Only thing I had this evening was to direct my fellow counselors to some very interesting reading in the Wednesday packet. It's the last item on the agenda, the discussion of street maintenance funding, and it's the last part of that agenda package, the 1996 Roads Ahead report from the Mayor's Task Force on Street Funding. I hadn't read it for a long time. It took up a good portion of a file drawer in my office when I worked here. And it's very good reading. It was a very comprehensive report put together by a large task force who met over a long period of time, evaluating how to pay for street projects, old and new. That's where the emphasis came from that we've been operating under since then, focusing on arterials and collectors and letting what were then a lot of really good streets wait. They're not good anymore, and that's what we're stuck with now. But it's interesting reading a variety of recommendations for different funding mechanisms that we haven't used and have considered and set aside. The comparisons in how many miles of streets we had at that time to be concerned about, the population of the community, the difference in traffic throughout Albany. It's really interesting reading. I'm a student of history anyway, and this is history that some of us have lived through, and I think it's a good perspective to add to the things that we're considering now for taking care of the alligators and the Everglades.
Nice, like that. Councilor Newton-Azor?
Yes, I will. I haven't gotten to that part of my packet yet, but I will have gotten to that part by Wednesday. I have a question, though, about Marvin's Gardens as well. I'm also disappointed to hear that we failed to keep this location open. I was curious, though, about the legality. Are we truly in compliance with HB 3115? And I know that previously we weren't able to work with a partner at Marvin's Gardens because of HB 3115, but with the changes for the grants passed with the Supreme Court, are we now able to work with a private partner? And then my last follow-up question is, I know that in the article I read that we were going to be, and I believe also in Peter Trodson's email he sent over, that we were going to be trying to match folks up with available beds. I was curious, because we were told that there were bed bugs at the site, what were we doing to make sure that those bed bugs aren't now spreading to all other facilities?
I'll start us off, let Peter finish. So regarding House Bill 3115, the city of Albany was never required to open Marvin's Gardens or have a designated space where people could come and camp. That was the option that the city elected to do. Other cities, and I would venture to say most of the cities around this area did not provide a designated space for people, and in fact played kind of musical chairs and shuffled people around for different hours of the day. Our option that we chose as a city was to provide a place that people could go and kind of rely on being there all the time without having to get up in the mornings and move to different places and whatnot. The difficulty was it had to be a no barrier shelter, which prohibited people like Second Chance and others from being able to come in and help, for lack of a better word, help run the site. There were offers by several people who wanted to do that, but we couldn't allow it because they would put restrictions or rules in place, and we couldn't have rules in place or else it's not a no barrier shelter. The difficulty with having a no barrier shelter over time is that there are no, except for complying with the law, the statutes that are in place, there are no rules, and a lot of times people took advantage of that. And unfortunately, it's only a select few that, kind of like when you were a kid, that ruin it for all, And that's what seemed to be going on at Marvin's Gardens, is some people were coming in and seemed like pushing out people who that was the intended purpose of having it. And then we had people in there who wanted to commit crimes and acts of violence in there and cause problems. And it's unfortunate for those who were not there for that. But that was kind of one of the challenges of having a no barrier shelter. And I felt like it was working well for the first several months, and then it slowly has been deteriorating since, according to the police. But being in compliance with House Bill 3115, again, we were never really required to do that. But one of the things that the Boise case didn't do was it didn't really talk about what was and was not reasonable. And that left a gray area of interpretation to everyone. And then the state of Oregon codified the Boise Martin case. Once the Supreme Court came out of the Grants Pass decision, it did seem to put more clarity. I wouldn't say it completely clarified it, but it was more clarity on what was reasonable or not. And so I think that gives the city and other cities more tools to help regulate where we're at and still be in compliance with 3115. Doesn't mean that we won't have some for-profit agency that will attempt to sue one of these cities at some point in time. In fact, we've been told that that's probably to be on the lookout for that. But on the other hand, one of the concerns I had when we were opening Marvin's Garden was that, so the concern I had was the liability it put on the city, because we were saying, okay, this is where you can go. But we didn't have the
Mike died.
resources in place to patrol it. And we were worried that someone could get assaulted, raped, murdered, or assaulted at Marvin's Gardens, and that would put liability on the city. And I ran that through CIS when we were going to open Marvin's Gardens, but they at the time said that we would be okay with that. However, on the presentation that Aaron Heisel gave not that long ago after the Grants Pass decision came out from the Supreme Court, he cautioned cities about having places like Marvin's Gardens and the liability that it could present. And Aaron actually used to work for CIS, and he doesn't anymore, but anyway. So we had some concerns there too, and recently we've had several pretty serious assaults out there that, that could expose the city to liability, so.
I have a quick follow-up as well that I remembered. What were the number of assaults we had previous to having Marvin's Gardens in place? Is it just because of the concentration of individuals? Or did we also have assaults happen? What are the number differences between when folks are more dispersed versus when they're in one spot? Wanted to get a little bit of clarity on that. And then I also was curious about, I know you mentioned Chance, not wanting to go in there, but I'm wondering, how have other organizations felt? I'm not sure, Marilyn, if that's something you could ask when you go to the Heart Board as well.
We can tell you right off that Chance is very much in favor of closing Marvin's Garden. And there are other service providers as well that are in favor of that. And we have to point out that it wasn't a failure. It was never a program. In fact, it was given the name Marvin's Garden by us, but it was really at the very origin of it, it was an alternate camping site. That's all, to be minimally safe and minimally secure. It was not meant to be, amenities provided campground or anything more than an alternate camping site so that we could keep our public rights-of-way clear. And it became, over time, a concentrated area for crime. In the beginning, it seemed to be working as planned, but the number of harassments, assaults, overdoses, disorderly conduct, the amount of time that the police spent there, and then the assaults on a police officer too, became alarming. And they gave rise for the police chief to make the call that, hey, can we please close that? We cannot guarantee safety there. And it's a concentrated area for crime, and we have to take steps to break that up. So it ended up being a safety and security risk, a substantial one.
Can I please request numbers for assaults on officers from people that are unhoused during Marvin's Gardens and prior to Marvin's Gardens?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Counselor McGee, can you go ahead and go, and I'll finish up with Counselor Kopczynski.
Mayor, I apologize. Did you answer the question regarding bed bugs? Did you have anything in regards to that or no?
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay.
Right. Me too.
Yeah.
Hello. So I can't specifically answer that question for Helping Hands and their protocol, but I know Chance, they have like bins when you come in during their intake process. They take your clothes, they give you clothes that are clean, and then they superheat those. They go through a whole process before you're allowed into like general area with the items, and that's how they manage it.
Okay, I just would hate for a major bed bug epidemic to spread throughout the city.
Nope, they have lots of protocol there.
Excellent.
Ready? Okay. Thank you. Counselor McGee, do you have anything for business from the council?
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, the mayor and you and I attended the Uplift Career Summit in Eugene for empowering youth pretty much, and had an opportunity to sit on a panel for mentoring, and then gave a talk about mentoring, advancing your career, and shedding some light on Albany and sort of the relationship between the mayor and I, and mentorship, and, you know, just leading with compassion and all that good stuff. That's all I got.
Thank you. And to add to that, one of the young people there, a high school, soon-to-be senior at Wilsonville High School? No, West Lynn High School, reached out to me about talking with him about the city of Albany and what we got going on here, comparing it to what they have in West Lynn. And so I said, because you're not 18, would you please get permission from your mother for me to meet with you via Zoom? And the mother reached out to me, and she said, I'd love for you to talk to my son about this. So we're going to meet sometime next week. But that program has been really great for young people that are interested in local governments, mentoring, getting into business. It used to be called Business Week. Well, anyways, it used to be called Youth Business Week, and this morphed into Uplift Career Summit, and it's been a really great program for me as a mentor, but for me as a young grandfather looking at mentoring my grandchildren. So it's a great program. Thank you, Councilor McGee. And she gave a great talk. If you haven't seen her talk, drop what you're doing and just go when she's talking. So thank you. And Councilor Kopczynski.
Appreciate that, Mayor. Appreciate that.
On a lighter note, Mayor, when that lady comes down from West Lynn, bring her into the carousel.
I will.
Okay, Saturday morning passed, we had animal number 45 put onto the carousel platform. And it was a whiz-bang, huge amount of fun for everybody that showed up, especially the family and sponsors that do it, which is part of the process when we unveil an animal. So we cut up the big sheet cake, and he gave cake to everybody that walked in the door for an hour and a half. Everybody just had a huge amount of fun. A bunch of them then went down to Monteith Park and started playing around in the park, which is also great fun. I see that happening every day I'm down there. So that's all I've got tonight.
What's the animal's name?
Kiger the Mustang.
Thank you.
And to top it off, the little boy that Kiger was the namesake, the little boy was there. It was really cool. For me, I'm just tired. I have nothing else. So I'll bring it back Wednesday. City manager report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to, although I think I've introduced her to all of you, I'd like to welcome Kayla Barber-Parada to the staff. And we have, with each one of you, we've made an appointment to sit down for a lunch and have some time to get to know.
I didn't get a lunch. What's up with that?
Oh, well, you have a coffee in the morning. Right now, the Albany Downtown Association Mixer is kicking off, so I think some of you all will be wandering over to the Squeaky Cork for that. And then tomorrow evening is National Night Out, and so several folks are participating in that. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
So thank you very much for that, and I'm looking forward to having lunch with you, Kayla, since they just kicked me to the curb. But I want to say this Wednesday will be our last meeting for 6 weeks. Just saying. I'm excited about it. Quality time with family, and I hope all of you take time to do the same things. Family, get ready for school, get, the whole thing that we do before we started doing this. I think it's a great opportunity for also staff to take a break and not see our faces and hear our voices and enjoy some time away from us. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. I will see you all 6 o'clock Wednesday